All right, so we're still in ecology, and tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about populations. And remember, a population is a group of the same species, and we're going to just try and describe essentially populations and the characteristics of them by identifying factors that affect population growth.
Okay, so ecologists and researchers constantly monitor populations, and they do this by measuring geographic range, the density and distribution, the growth rate, and age structure. So we're going to go in a little bit more depth through these. So the first one being geographic range.
So the geographic range is, as it says here, the area inhabited by a population. So this can be as small as, if you're thinking about a bacterial population, the population of bacteria living inside of a rotting pumpkin or on a petri dish, or it could be as large as the population of a certain type of fish, cod for instance, in the Atlantic Ocean, which of course is a massive geographic range.
The next two being population density and how they're distributed. So population density is the number of individuals per unit area. So taking a certain area and measuring how many are found in that area. And then we also look at how they're distributed. So there's three different ways. Random distribution, so just randomly throughout the area. Uniform, like so, and then concentrated in clumps, like so. So there's three different ways of distribution within the density of the population.
And then the final way we sort of evaluate populations is by looking at their growth rate. And anytime you have a rate, you have a couple different variables to be thinking about. And in this case, we're looking at the size of the population. Is it increasing, decreasing, or staying the same in an amount of time?
Oh, and then last one, we're actually going to look at age structure too. So age structure is showing the number of males and females within each age a population contains. So there's lots of reasons why we care about age structure. If we were ecologists and we wanted to know the age structure of, let's say, of a certain plant, we would like to know age structure because some plants can't reproduce, or even animals too, till a certain age. So knowing how the ages are distributed throughout the population will help us understand a little bit more about their effects in the ecosystem. Another thing too, with animals, only females can reproduce offspring, so knowing the amount of females per males in the group also help us understand the population as well.
All right, so how does a population change? Birth rate, of course, the number of organisms born over a set amount of time. Death rate, same idea, right? The number of organisms that die over a certain amount of time. Immigration, so think about immigration as organisms entering a geographic range that they hadn't been in before. And then the last one is emigration, which is sort of the opposite of immigration. You're leaving a geographic range that you had been in.
Okay.
Growth rate. Growth means the birth rate is greater than the death rate. And populations shrink if the death rate is greater than the birth rate.
So taking a look at a couple of different age structure diagrams, we can see what the birth rate and death rate is like just by looking at the shape. And so we have three different countries here: Afghanistan, United States, and Italy, and they all have very different population growth patterns. So Afghanistan, we see a lot of the majority of the population is very young. So there's a very high birth rate, low death rate. The United States, pretty stable birth rate as opposed to death rate in the older population. And then Italy, what we're actually seeing in Italy is there's actually a low birth rate. So their population is slightly decreasing because we have the majority being older and eventually going to die versus the amount being born.
And this was actually declared a national crisis in Italy, I was reading last year. Because if you think about it, right, that group on the lower end, right, will eventually be, the older population will eventually be needing to really provide a base for the older population in terms of Social Security, in terms of a tax base, and they simply don't have it in that country. So it really is going to affect their social programs over the years to come.
So this just shows, again, births making the population increase, death, population decreases. Same with immigration causing the increase in population, and emigration species coming out of the population, that decreases the population. So those are some factors affecting the growth of populations.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways we can measure growth and look at it sort of graphically. And we've probably all heard of this, but one is referred to as exponential growth. And the larger a population gets, the faster it grows. So it's kind of a compounding or a cascading effect, I guess you'd want to think of. And things like food, space, lack of predators or diseases can allow populations to grow.
And then so, for instance, invasive species show this exponential growth because they have a good amount of food, space, they don't have any predators or disease to check their population. And so it allows them to grow exponentially and kind of take over an ecosystem. So that's an example of how a species can grow exponentially. Then there's logistic growth. So that's when exponential growth starts to taper off. And so this is what we see in most population species. This is because resources are not unlimited. They eventually are limited, and that limits their growth. And so the growth rate slows down and stops. So the birth rate decreases and death rate increases at this point of logistic growth.
Okay, so you can talk about phases of growth within logistic growth. And you can see here, after time, a population grows exponentially. Again, that's when there's plenty of food, lack of disease, plenty of resources to basically continue to reproduce at an incredible rate. At some point, that growth rate slows down, and that usually means there's one limiting factor that shows up, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, that starts to cause a problem, right? Maybe you get limited in food, or maybe the waste isn't being removed quickly enough, and it starts to cause issues for that population. Then the growth stops. So that isn't to say that the population crashes, it just means that birth rates and death rates kind of equal out, and you're basically at a zeroing or a leveling off. And this is referred to as the carrying capacity. So environments have what we've referred to as a carrying capacity, essentially the maximum number of organisms that can be maintained sustainably.
So here's our definition of carrying capacity: the maximum number of individuals in a particular species that a particular environment can support. Because remember, there are limiting factors to how large a population can grow. So then we see the population is stabilized. And so this is kind of interesting. We as humans are thinking, well, when are we going to reach our carrying capacity? As you can see, we are in a very extreme exponential growth in our population. And eventually we have to think about when our resources might run out. What's going to help stabilize our population? Are we even going to get to that point?
And remember, it only takes one thing, right? It can be not enough water, not enough food, not enough shelter, right? So if one of those areas is lacking, you can reach a carrying capacity.
So this is another example, just kind of a visual showing, yes, how you reach the carrying capacity in a population. Eventually, there's things that are going to check the population growth. And so you're going to see that stabilization of growth.
Okay, so yeah, to finish out here, a couple of questions. Look at the following age structure diagram. What type of growth is this population experiencing? So we're looking at Japan's population pyramid. Is the population growing? Letter A. Is the population decreasing? Letter B. Is the population stable? Letter C. And then number 2, look at figure 2, okay, right here. Which phase of logistic growth, 1 to 3, is the population of Mexico experiencing?
Good. So remember, answer these questions in the Google form. Make sure you're logged into your Apps account to do so. And don't forget to interact with your notes, come up with your 2 questions in summary. We'll be checking that on Monday. Hope you have a good MEA break.